You know the story, or you think you do. George Armstrong Custer, The Last Stand, an American legend etched in stone and textbook. But what if the legend is wrong? What if the story we've been told for generations is built on a secret kept by the one man who saw it all and who chose for years to say nothing? Quick cuts, a period portrait of Gall, a blurry photo of Custer, the waving grass of the battlefield. This is not a story about heroes and villains. This is a story about evidence and silence, about a Lakota war chief named Gall who witnessed the truth of that bloody hour, and whose account, when he finally shared it, didn't just challenge history, it shattered it. But with every telling, his story changed. Key details vanished. New ones appeared. Why? Sound of a single gunshot echo fading into the wind. A close-up on Gall's intense eyes from a portrait. Was he protecting someone? Hiding a painful truth? Or was he leaving a coded message for those who knew how to listen? Today, we peel back the layers of a 150-year-old mystery. We follow the trail of contradictions, the deliberate omissions, and the one unwavering thread of a father's vengeance that rewrites everything. The battle didn't end when the gunfire stopped. The real mystery was just beginning. Music swells slightly, haunting, subtle, with a low, persistent pulse. Text appears on screen. Intrigue and Mystery, the secret history of Little Bighorn. Final line delivered as a direct, quiet challenge to the viewer. Watch until the end and decide for yourself what you believe and what Gall dared not say. Frames the mystery. It doesn't just present history, it frames it as an active mystery with clues, changing stories, silences, coded messages. Personal stakes. It ties the vast historical event to a single, compelling character's motivation and psychology, a father's vengeance. Viewer engagement. The final line is a direct call to action, placing the judgment in the viewer's hands and promising a reveal worth their time. Atmosphere. The pacing, music cues, and visual suggestions create a tone of investigation and revelation, perfectly matching your title, Intrigue and Mystery. This intro promises not just a documentary, but a historical detective story. Exactly what will drive viewership and keep audiences engaged until the final clue is revealed. We are taught that Custer made his final stand at the Little Bighorn, but the account familiar to most Americans presents only part of the truth. A Lakota fighter, Chief Gall, was there for the entire conflict, and his subsequent account does more than question the official record. It completely inverts it. Gall's description, detailing frantic withdrawals, malfunctioning firearms, and savage close-quarters fighting, uncovers a narrative of the battle that remains largely unknown. What follows is the story of Custer's last day, seen through the perspective of the warrior who played a key role in its conclusion. Gall looked down upon the remains of his wife and children. The air was thick with smoke. Shouts of terror echoed through the village. In that instant, something within him shattered. He pledged revenge against every soldier responsible for his family's death. The true account of Custer's last stand did not open with heroic cavalry advances. It opened with a father's sorrow, and it closed with one of the most savage and misrepresented clashes in America's past. As Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer approached the Little Bighorn Valley in June of 1876, Gall and his community had mere hours to get ready. At 36 years old, Gall was already a famed figure within the Hunkpapa Sioux. He was recognized for his physical power, his tactical insight, and his absolute dedication to his people. Sitting Bull had taken him as a brother. They served together as defenders of their nation during a period when United States expansion was intensifying annually. By the end of June, news moved through the village that troops were approaching, Custer and the 7th Cavalry were advancing. For Gall, this was far from just another skirmish. It seemed like fate drawing near. That morning, Sioux scouts discovered discarded supply containers. The soldiers were nearby. Once the enemy saw the scouts and pursued them, Custer understood his scheme for a sudden assault had failed. If the Sioux became aware the 7th Cavalry was close, they would disperse across the terrain. He was left with a single choice. He would attack swiftly. He would attack with full force. Sioux scouts raced back to alert the village. Sitting Bull assembled his council of leaders, which included Gall and Crazy Horse. They started devising a strategy to protect their community. U.S. scouts observing from adjacent ridges detected activity in the vast encampment beneath them. He later declared, "After that, I killed all my enemies with the hatchet." This was both actual and symbolic. He discarded his rifle and fought in close combat with the intensity of a warrior propelled by sorrow. Reno's soldiers dismounted and pushed forward on foot. Gall organized warriors to oppose them. Sitting Bull, meanwhile, kept performing sacred ceremonies, calling for protection and power. The responsibility for directing the battle fell to Gall and Crazy Horse. Their response was swift. Warriors streamed from the wooded areas and hit the cavalry line from every direction. Gunfire raked through the ranks. Reno's formation began to buckle. Then destiny introduced another turn. Among Reno's men was Bloody Knife, a scout who had once dwelled among Gall's people. Gall had loathed him, labeling him a betrayer. Their animosity was reciprocal. Gall had slain several of Bloody Knife's brothers and even his son in prior fights. As Reno struggled to steady his soldiers, a round struck Bloody Knife in the skull. The impact sprayed blood and brain matter across Reno's face. Spattered with the remains of his reliable scout, Reno lost his nerve. His control dissolved. His men fractured and ran. They scrambled back across the river in a frantic, disordered withdrawal. Warriors pulled soldiers from their mounts. Others tumbled into the current and drowned. Some were hauled from the mire and slain in brutal, close fighting. Over 30 U.S. troops perished before gaining the relative safety of the bluffs. Gall was determined to eradicate them completely. Yet before he could pursue Reno's fleeing column, he heard cries from the northern direction. Another force was approaching. It was Custer. Gall assembled his fighters and rode toward the commotion. What he witnessed there became one of the most contested episodes in America's military annals. Gall insisted he observed Custer's troops advancing at a deliberate pace along the ridgelines. They halted upon seeing the enormous expanse of the Sioux encampment. Custer himself moved ahead to survey the terrain with field glasses. Gall noted that Custer's hair was shorter than he had anticipated. Only afterward did he grasp that it was Longhair himself who had shorn his iconic locks prior to the campaign. Gall was convinced Custer faltered in that instant. Perhaps he finally comprehended the scale of what confronted him. Thousands of fighters, thousands more women and children, an opposition far beyond anything he had envisioned. In Gall's telling, Sioux warriors initiated the assault. If accurate, this forced Custer's men into a defensive posture, not an offensive one. This would imply Custer never led the valiant charge later myths portrayed. Instead, he was surprised and overrun. Not every report aligns with Gall's recollection. Some observers recalled Custer attacking first, only to be rapidly driven back. The precise sequence remains disputed. But by the time Gall arrived at the northern hills, the fight was already spiraling into bedlam. Custer's 5 companies were surrounded. Their Springfield carbines malfunctioned under rapid volleys. Many soldiers cast them aside and drew their pistols instead. Warriors assailed them from all sides. Some bore firearms. Others wielded only war clubs or axes. They stampeded horses through the cavalry ranks to splinter their formations and disperse the troops. "It was a slaughter," Gall stated. "We took no prisoners. Our hearts were bad, and we cut and shot them all to pieces." Custer's battalions fractured in the turmoil. One group made its final stand beside Custer on the rise later, called Custer Hill. Gall did not claim to have witnessed Custer's death personally, but he was certain the group was swiftly overcome once encircled. Another contingent battled on the ridges to the southeast. These were the companies of Captain Miles Keogh's and Lieutenant James Calhoun. Gall later expressed admiration for their orderly conduct. Methodically, they withdrew up the slope, continuing to fire as they retreated. They resisted until their ammunition was entirely spent. Keogh perished beside his horse. Calhoun's soldiers refused to flee. Their remains were discovered heaped together in a compact ring of defense. Custer's entire force was annihilated in under an hour. Gall then wheeled south once more, hunting for Reno's survivors. The remaining troops on the bluffs, now joined by Benteen's column, totaled roughly 400 men. They were weary, disordered, and perilously low on water. Lakota and Cheyenne fighters surrounded their position, firing down from the encompassing hills. The soldiers scraped out shallow rifle pits and attempted to hold their ground. Gall advocated for a night assault. Crazy Horse deemed the potential losses too great. Instead, they chose to wait. Thirst and the oppressive heat would erode the soldiers' strength. "They will fall into our hands," Gall said, "when the thirst burns in their throats and drives them mad for water." By dawn, the troops were in dire straits. The wounded pleaded for water. Some attempted to crawl toward the river, only to be cut down by marksmen. Retrieving a single pail of water became an act of extraordinary bravery, later honored with medals of honor. Then, in the late afternoon, Sioux scouts observed a dust cloud rising far in the distance. "The Big Dust," Gall termed it. General Terry and General Gibbon were advancing. The Sioux and Cheyenne struck their camps immediately. Within hours, thousands had disappeared into the Bighorn Mountains. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, known to them as the Battle of the Greasy Grass, had concluded. For the Sioux and Cheyenne, it was a breathtaking triumph. For the United States, it was a profound national disgrace. Yet the victory proved fleeting. In the following months, the Army initiated a merciless campaign. Villages were put to the torch, buffalo herds were slaughtered, essential supplies were destroyed. The Sioux confronted starvation. Many were compelled to surrender or flee northward. Gall accompanied Sitting Bull into Canada. There, they fought for survival in an unfamiliar territory with scarce resources. As time passed, Gall and Sitting Bull grew distant. They disagreed on how best to secure their people's future. In the end, Gall returned to the United States and made his home at Standing Rock. There he made his peace with the authorities. He embraced the Christian faith. He promoted a path of collaboration as the sole route to enduring survival. Some among the Lakota viewed this as an act of treachery. Others felt he was choosing a practical course in a world he could no longer oppose through warfare. In 1886, a decade after the battle, Gall revisited the Little Bighorn as a guest of honor. For the first time, American audiences heard the story told from a native point of view. Gall recounted the battle in his Lakota tongue, in fractured English, and at times through the language of hand signs. Yet, his narratives were not always consistent. Some iterations highlighted his combat with Reno's column. Others concentrated on Custer's final moments. In certain tellings, the deaths of his own family were left out completely. Scholars have long questioned these discrepancies. Was Gall tailoring his account for different listeners? Were his translators failing to convey his words accurately? Did newspapermen add their own color? The definitive answers are lost. Still, amid all the contradictions, one fact endures. Gall's testimony compelled America to face a narrative of the battle that had been suppressed for generations. He offered the nation the indigenous viewpoint, raw, intimate, and profoundly human. Today, the hills of the Little Bighorn are silent, but the reverberations of that day persist. The drumming of hooves, the crack of rifles, the cries of warriors, the last breaths of men caught in a fight they were destined to lose. And among those lasting echoes is the voice of Gall, a fighter, a father, a man who endured, resolved that the legacy of his people and the reality of that day would never again be forgotten. But perhaps the greatest mystery Gall left behind isn't in the battle's chaos. It's in the silence he chose. A warrior who fought with a hatchet of grief, yet later shook hands with the very government that sought to erase his people. A father who never spoke his family's names in public, yet whose private fury rewrote history. Why did he return to the Little Bighorn? Not for glory, but for a reckoning. He stood on those haunted hills, not as a conqueror, but as a living question. What is truth when two nations remember the same day in opposite ways? His story forces us to wonder what other histories are waiting in the shadows. What voices have we not yet heard? The battle ended in 1876, but the war over memory is never over. Look around you. Whose last stand is being written today? And whose Gall is waiting to speak? History isn't just what happened, it's who tells it. And sometimes the most powerful story isn't the one shouted from the monuments, it's the one whispered by the ghosts in the hills. Would you believe his story? Comment below what question you would have asked Gall if you stood beside him on that quiet field.